I think the world has finally realized, look, the green energy is dead. It doesn't make economic sense. But it also doesn't make sense to be 100% reliant upon crude oil, specifically if the oil you're getting logistically comes from an area of the world that is so precarious, like the Middle East, that you don't ever want to be tied to the same situation they've experienced the last 60 days. You know, every time something happens in the economy, it seems like we come up with new words that we have to learn what they mean, not only in terms of just the pure definition, but what they mean in the use. So over the last 60 days, specifically, we've been hearing about the word demand destruction. Demand destruction is an implication that means because the price of oil has gone up so high over the last 60 days, that certain people that demand or need that crude oil to run their economies, run their countries, run their lives, they're having to make a choice, which is, I don't expect today I can afford the oil byproduct, the gasoline, the diesel, the fuel, the jet fuel, the electricity. I can't afford it. So what I'm going to do is stop demanding it. I'm going to stop needing or requiring as much fossil fuels as I did 3 weeks ago, 60 days ago, before the war started. Demand destruction is even more severe. What that means is not only am I going to cut back, but because of the severity of the lack of enough oil and gas supplies, and because I have a higher cost of my income, a higher cost of my country's budget to buy energy, I'm going to be looking for ways to never be put in that position again. I'm going to look for ways as alternative energy, as different ways of managing my consumption, different ways to get the energy I need outside of that particular energy source, which is crude oil. I think the world has finally realized, look, the green energy is dead. It doesn't make economic sense. But it also doesn't make sense to be 100% reliant upon crude oil, specifically if the oil you're getting logistically comes from an area of the world that is so precarious, so volatile, like the Middle East, that you don't ever want to be tied to the same situation they've experienced the last 60 days. This US Israeli-Iranian war has really woken the entire globe up to the sensitivity of the necessary access to easy and reliable and economic energy. As a result, you're going to see Europe, you're going to see Asia, you're going to see small islands and countries like Costa Rica who don't produce a barrel of oil. They're going to start looking at it and saying, wait a minute, we've got multiple choices to make here. First off, is there any part of our economy that we can stop using oil and go to something like wind or nuclear or solar or hydrogen? They're going to look around and say, what part of our industry that is currently using crude oil that is really a luxury consumption that we could either stop using, diminish the use, or in some way alter the use to lower our demand for crude oil in the future? Is there a way we can get crude oil from different sources than we've been getting it before, so that way we don't have disruption? So demand destruction sounds like two powerful words. Demand, which means I need it, I have to have it. It's not like I want it, I have to have it. And destruction means destroyed, meaning that you're not just temporarily alleviating, you're not simply digressing, you're not moving to a temporary solution. You're saying you've destroyed my need for that particular source, probably either short-term, long-term, or permanently. Now, I tell you why it's so important. If we had a current demand and supply curve before the war started, let's just say it was 101 million barrels a day of demand globally every day for oil, and we had 101 to 102 million barrels a day of supply. Well, we didn't have enough excess that we were storing it in our reserves. We didn't have enough excess to put it in our strategic petroleum storage, and neither did any other country. What we essentially were doing is watching a world producing just enough oil to satisfy day-to-day demand. Any excess that we had, we put in salt domes, storage tanks, facilities, or it was trapped in pipelines, storage tanks waiting to be loaded, or waterborne vessels. Now, if we change the demand side, or it is like a slow death, and we start to see demand destruction taking place today, and it's a continuation of a lowering of demand across the globe to some degree over the next 2 to 5 years, you might find yourself where normal growth in demand goes up 1 to 1.5 million barrels every 2 to 3 years. Instead of seeing that 1 to 1.5 million barrels growth, we might find is that we see zero growth, or actually a lessening of demand, where you, for the first time in a long time, maybe we're not at 101 million barrels of oil a day of consumption, we're down to 99 or 98 or 97 million barrels. Now, with demand destruction comes price volatility. So today we're experiencing very high prices, not enough supply, and ongoing demand. You either lower that demand and you increase supply, or what you have is a slow continuation of a reversal of the high prices, meaning we're still going to have a limitation on supply. Demand is going to shrink very slowly, which means the price, the commodity price, is going to stay higher for longer. The quicker you can replace the supply And the quicker you see, or the more expedited you see demand coming down, you'll see that inversion where now instead of having high crude oil prices, you could end up with an inversion in the next 36 to 48 months where now you say we have much lower demand, supply is caught up. In fact, other supply sources that were not relevant today become relevant. And as a result, you have too much supply with a decrease in demand. The real question to demand destruction, how long-term is it? How permanent is it? Is it something that's going to come back? Well, after 41 years in the business, let me tell you what happens. I'm looking out the window as I do this recording. Thousands of cars are going by here in Dallas, and I'm watching them drive by as I'm talking to you. And the idea is that 10 years ago, there were smart cars. Everybody's worried about miles per gallon. Everybody's worried about fuel efficiency. If I look out the window today, I would be willing to say 7 out of 10 vehicles are either large vehicles, trucks, or SUVs, or crossovers, right? No one's worried about miles per gallon. That's because oil and gas has been so cheap. If we have a continuation of really high oil prices and that resonates down to gasoline and diesel prices, many of those people with those cars are going to say, you know what? We're burning an extra $4,000, $5,000, $8,000, $9,000 a year just to run our cars or our vehicles in our household. We're going to go change that bigger SUV and get ourselves a Honda Accord, or we're going to get something that's smaller with more miles per gallon. That in itself is demand destruction that has a 3 to 5 year window, because the average car owner owns their cars 3 to 5 years. So we see a longer price hike in crude oil prices and gasoline and diesel and utilities. People are going to buy smaller houses. They're going to buy less sports vehicles. They're going to buy less boats and RVs and trailers. They're going to buy smaller cars. And as a result, you're automatically experiencing demand destruction that may take 3 to 5 years to reverse. Because how does it reverse? All of a sudden, oil prices drop from $105 a barrel today, goes back to $65 or $60 a barrel in 3 to 5 years. And people say, oh, gasoline was expensive. Now it's not. I've drove the Honda Accord for 3 years. Price of gas is cheap. The economy's doing better. Energy prices are down. Let me go buy another big SUV. Let me buy that boat again. Let me buy that ATV. We're dealing in a world that it's either a top-down or a bottom-up consideration. Either I've got to lower my demand, or I've got to increase my supply. It's one or the other. Rarely does it happen at the same time. If it did, then the time frame between too much supply, not enough supply, too much demand, or not enough demand, those separations, those divergence will get shorter and shorter the longer, or at least the more relevant, those two sides of the curve come together. I want to see a decrease in demand, an increase in supply, and a moderation of crude oil prices. Look, folks, I'll be candid with you. After being in the oil and gas business since 1985, I don't want to see $105 oil. I really don't want to see more than $95 a barrel at any point in time. What it does, it creates demand destruction. What it also creates is too much competition for alternative energy sources that really are not sustainable or long-term in value, or what we call a temporary Band-Aid. Those Band-Aids don't last, but from the oil and gas industry side or point of view, it is destructive to our future models, talking about the wells we need to drill, the cost of drilling those wells, and the economic returns. It's uncertainty relative to demand destruction.